Chris Wallace here with your ATM news. I want to tell you something that may be a little unpopular, but I'll say what I have to say anyways. So let's get started on therapy. Men ask me all the time if I think therapy is worthwhile. And you may be surprised to learn that despite my background and knowing there are good therapists out there, I know this for a fact, I don't generally recommend it. To me, it's a last resort option, and our default should be to try to avoid it if we can. Let me give you an example of what I prefer. I have a client who runs a successful fitness program. Every week, I see him on social media with a group of his people that he puts through his paces and doing their morning exercises. And I asked him about what got him interested in fitness. And he told me that when he first went to the gym, some older guy had taken him under his wing and showed him what to do. And it lit a fire in him. Bingo. That's what I'm talking about. Older, elder, wiser mothers teaching the next guy what he knows, passing along hard-earned knowledge. I say this is the way of men. What you learn from me, I hope you'll have occasion to teach others of equal need. The world desperately needs powerful men. I've done this kind of work on and off since 1986. I started as a counselor at one addictions treatment place, and on the side, I taught alcohol awareness under contract for the Addiction Research Foundation here in Ontario to people busted for drunk driving. I knew all about that, of course. In my second year of college, I worked 40 hours straight from Friday night right to Sunday night with one 7-hour break in the middle to go sleep around the corner at my sister's house at an auto addictions residential facility. That way I could get full-time pay while still being in school full-time. I ran the place on weekends doing 2 3-hour group therapy sessions Sunday and Saturdays, giving lectures, seeing individuals as the senior residential counselor. It was baptism by fire. After graduation, I figured I needed more life experience. And so I only saw people privately, people that I thought I could truly help. I made counseling a part-time avocation at that point, but I kept mentoring people. In fact, I worked for years as a senior VP in paid circulation of the newspaper business. And then I was responsible for 150 reps and 20 managers in 7 cities. And all I did was coach and mentor. I tell you this because while I'm all for mental fitness and I identify with the challenges that we face as human beings, and I think you'll always get something from therapy, I don't think most of it works. I've helped lots and lots of folks with phobias using therapeutic methods, and I've been a consulting hypnotist for many, many years. Despite being immersed in the field and helping hundreds of clients over decades, I think therapy for most men is a bit of a waste of time. I mean, think of the times in your life where you learned something that really stuck with you. Chances are it was not from a therapist, though it could be, but most of the time it's going to come from a mentor. And I'm a big fan of mentoring. I think men should find mentors. Furthermore, the cultural tendency to pathologize everybody around us is a direct result of an overdependence on therapy. I meet men with social anxiety disorder and various other diagnoses, merited or not. Ask yourself, who would I be without this label? Think hard to answer. Widespread diagnosing sees the world through a sick lens. Guys come up all the time and they're throwing around the dark tetrad labels like they're nothing about their ex-girlfriends. If someone acts selfish, they're called a narcissist. If they're uncaring, well, that must be a psychopath. They're a little bit devious. The things didn't go your way, must be Machiavellian. Broke your heart? That fucking sadist. Maybe these are true in context, but probably not. A therapist with an anxious client, well, that's a cakewalk compared to having a schizophrenic for a client, right? And it translates into steady income for a number of years. Well, I believe people's intentions are usually good. The system is not set up to get that person who's anxious right with themselves and sent along their way. The higher up the therapeutic help ladder, the more we see stagnation. For example, people are often on medications for a decade, sometimes 2 decades, and they never really get better. What's with that? If someone is paying for talk therapy, through a copay or insurance, the danger is whomever pays the therapist is the true client. It's just human nature. And I don't fault people for this. Another thing is that there's been a great deal of focus on emotions over the last few decades. More than one client has told me that he paid out of pocket seeing a therapist for years, and all they did was concentrate on his pain. Huh? Meanwhile, his marriage is falling apart. I suspect what's behind this is that since the 1970s, more and more therapists are female, and under their influence, emotions now rule. Most male therapists, not all, are at least partly feminized. In fact, the whole culture has been feminized. And we are now run from the margins by a preposterous egalitarianism, race theory, queer theory, et cetera, et cetera. But I digress. I've found that when people focus on their feelings over and over, they just stay sick. In fact, talking about your feelings leads to rumination, and rumination leads to depression and anxiety. My father called that navel gazing. There's a Greek term, umphaloskepsis. That's really suitable in this case. It's a real thing. See the graphic. When I first became an addictions counselor back in the 1980s, I refused to buy into the disease model. That's not to say that addiction in particular doesn't come with deeply embedded behavioral training. To some, it's like learning to ride a bike. And of course, you never forget how to ride a bike, do you? So, but the idea of putting a person who's evolving and learning and growing into a limiting box is counter to my instincts as a man or as a counselor. Do you have the disease of anxiety or shame? Are we talking about dis-ease? There's a difference in perception. I think the latest trend, which focuses on trauma, is another version of this. I'm not interested in wallowing in self-pity. I'm after trauma resilience. I'm about your survival despite the odds. To that end, most of the labels handed down by psychiatry and psychology are internal jargon that's better left between the professionals and not shared with the clients. The other thing is those labels are expanding to include more and more people every time the DSM is published, just to justify budgets in a lot of cases. While I see the merits in I'm not the only one with these problems, that aspect to the diagnosis, I get that. I think it quickly becomes harmful. Soon, everyone will need a therapist. How fucking convenient is that? How typically self-serving. So the brain is predictive, not reactive. Your nervous system is trained by your experiences, and those experiences are encoded as memories in your neurons, and those don't go away. At any given moment, what you think and feel are best guesses put forth by the brain based on concepts you learned along the way. This game-changing insight does two things for you. One, you own three things in life, brother. You own your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. That's what you own. Everything else is transient. If all of your thoughts and feelings are from your experiences, then no person or thing can make you feel anything. That's the first thing. Secondly, if you feel something today, it's likely that you've felt it before. This is liberating information in enlightened hands, because if you want to change how you feel, change what you do. And consequently, you'll change what you think. I teach people to acknowledge feelings and beliefs sourced in the past so that you can compassionately update your old concepts. Think of these as like your internal software. To that end, you use whatever wisdom you've accumulated and reparent yourself. Take on the role of guardian and protector of yourself. That's in part what the Taming Shame course does. The first thing you need to do as a consumer is to take charge of your therapeutic relationship. If you are going to get therapy, you want that therapist to act as a mentor, not just as a confessor, though you may need one. And not just as a maternal figure to whom you unload your emotional problems. Careful of this. Look, I have some suggestions if you do find yourself in therapy. Just a handful of them. Number one, if you're a man, use a male therapist. Do yourself a favor. I don't want to explain this at length. Just do that. Number two, pay close attention to the therapeutic plan so that there are measurable outcomes and expectations that you can both agree on. Number 3, nail down timeframes and avoid open-ended numbers of sessions where you just go and see them for years at a time. Try to avoid that. Number 4, tie everything you do together to how it translates into living a better life. Okay, I've picked this up. I've done that. I've come to this conclusion. How does that translate into living better? Critical. Number 5, therapists use something called the Socratic method, and they employ questions in an attempt to draw out whatever inner wisdom you might possess. That's fair enough. But realize that it's entirely possible that you may have very little of this inner wisdom. And so, therefore, you're going to need to be taught. You need somebody to mentor you. There you have it. If you're suicidal, bless you, brother, reach out to a therapist or hotline and get yourself in front of somebody. Don't be alone. Otherwise, look for mentors who can teach you stuff. It comes down to this. Life gets better when we get better at life. If you have any questions, comments, holler at me and I'll answer. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends. Meantime, stay powerful, true, and free. Thanks for listening.